The great halls of the Dragon Empire were filled with firelight, shadows moving across golden pillars and tall walls carved with ancient stories. Servants walked quietly, heads bowed, never daring to speak louder than a whisper. Among them moved a small human maid, her hands rough from endless work, her eyes lowered to the ground. Her name was unknown to most, for in the Palace of Dragons, humans were not seen as people. They were tools, weak creatures kept only to serve. She carried heavy jugs of water, her steps trembling, but she never complained. On her thin arms, hidden beneath worn cloth, dark bruises marked her skin. They were not from her work, but from the cruelty of dragon guards who enjoyed showing power over her kind. She tried to hide them, wrapping her sleeves tighter, moving faster so no one would notice. But pain followed her with every step. The maid believed no one would ever care. In this empire, dragons were rulers of the stars, conquerors of worlds. Humans were less than dust beneath their claws. No one would ever stop to ask why she winced when lifting a pot or why she flinched at sudden movement. And yet, fate works in strange ways. That night, the Dragon Emperor himself entered the Grand Hall. His presence silenced even the highest lords. Tall, armored in scales that shone like molten fire, his eyes burned like twin suns. Dragons bowed their heads, servants pressed themselves against walls, and no one dared to breathe too loud. For the Emperor was not only king of dragons but master of galaxies. His word could decide the life or death of thousands. He stepped forward, his voice deep, speaking with his advisors. The maid kept her head low, hoping he would not see her. To be noticed by the Emperor was dangerous. A single mistake could mean punishment. She carried her water jugs, praying to finish her task before his gaze turned. But destiny had other plans. As she passed near the throne, a jug slipped slightly in her grip. Her sleeve shifted, and for a moment, the bruises on her arm caught the golden firelight. Purple marks against pale skin. The Emperor's sharp eyes did not miss it. He paused mid-sentence. His advisors stopped speaking when they noticed his silence. The hall grew colder, the weight of his attention heavy like iron. The maid felt her breath catch. Slowly, his gaze lowered from her face to her hidden arm. She froze. Her heart raced so fast she thought it would burst. Why was he looking at her? No dragon, much less the Emperor, ever looked at a human servant for more than a second. Yet his eyes did not leave her. You. His voice rumbled like thunder. The jug almost slipped from her hands, but she forced herself to grip it tighter. She dared not look up, her knees shaking. "Come forward," he commanded. Whispers ran through the hall. The other dragons looked shocked, some even frowned. Why would the Emperor call a human maid? Servants pressed their heads lower to the floor, afraid of being caught watching. Slowly, trembling, the maid stepped closer. Each step felt like walking into fire. Her heart screamed at her to run, but her feet obeyed his command. When she reached the bottom of the steps leading to his throne, she sank to her knees, staring at the ground. The hall was silent. The Emperor studied her for a long moment, his golden eyes sharp as blades. Finally, he spoke again. "Who hurt you?" The maid almost forgot to breathe. Did she hear correctly? His words echoed in her ears. No dragon had ever asked a human such a question. No one cared. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her throat felt dry, her chest tight. The hall waited. The other dragons exchanged uneasy glances. Some narrowed their eyes, clearly displeased. She could feel their anger, their disbelief, pressing down on her like a storm. The Emperor's voice came again, deeper this time, carrying danger in every tone. "I asked you, who hurt you?" Her body shook. She wanted to stay silent, to say nothing, to disappear into the floor. To answer could bring death. To refuse could bring worse. Fear clawed at her heart, but the weight of his gaze made her feel trapped. Slowly, she whispered, "The guards, my lord." Her words were almost too soft to hear, but the silence of the hall carried them. A ripple of shock moved through the dragons present. Their eyes darted toward the Emperor, waiting to see his reaction. For a heartbeat, his face was unreadable. Then, fire flickered in his eyes, and his clawed hand tightened on the arm of his throne. The air grew heavy, thick with power. The guards who had hurt her shifted uneasily, suddenly realizing what she had revealed. The maid dared not look up. She wished she could take her words back, wished she could vanish. But it was too late. The truth was spoken. The emperor leaned forward, his voice quiet but sharper than any blade. Bring them. The order was final, cold, and terrifying. Dragons moved quickly, seizing the guilty guards. The hall filled with the sound of claws on stone, chains rattling, and the sudden cries of those who had thought themselves untouchable. The maid could not believe what she was hearing. Her mind spun. Why was this happening? Why would the emperor care about her bruises? She was nothing, less than nothing, and yet his wrath now burned for her sake. She stayed on her knees, shaking, her eyes wide but still fixed on the ground. Around her, dragons whispered in disbelief, some even in anger. A human maid? He defends her. One muttered. Another growled softly, this is weakness. But none dared speak too loud, for the emperor's anger was like a storm ready to break. The guards were dragged away, their fate sealed. The emperor leaned back against his throne, his gaze still fixed on the maid. His expression was impossible to read, but his eyes held something different now. Not just power, not just command, but a strange sharp interest. She felt it like fire on her skin. At last, he spoke again, his tone lower, thoughtful, dangerous. Rise. Her legs trembled as she obeyed, standing on unsteady feet. She still did not dare to meet his eyes. The hall waited in tense silence, every dragon watching, every servant holding their breath. The maid's heart pounded louder than war drums. She did not know if she had just been saved, or if her life was about to change forever. The grand hall of the Dragon Palace had never felt so tense. The human maid stood before the throne, her bruises no longer hidden, her secret now uncovered by the sharp eyes of the Dragon Emperor. Every dragon lord and soldier in the chamber watched in silence, their gazes burning with disbelief and unease. The Emperor had just ordered punishment for the guards who dared to harm her, and that alone was enough to shake the foundation of their pride. Dragons did not protect humans. Dragons ruled them, broke them, and used them. Yet here stood their ruler, the Emperor of Flame and Star, demanding answers from a fragile human maid. The maid's knees shook though she stood upright. Her throat felt dry, and her thoughts tumbled wildly. She wished she could sink back into the shadows where she belonged, unseen and forgotten. But fate had pushed her into the center of the storm. The Emperor's eyes, bright as molten gold, never left her. His voice came again, slow and heavy, filling the air like rolling thunder. Tell me, why did you not speak of this sooner? The maid swallowed, unable to raise her head. Every word stuck in her throat, her fear wrapping tight around her like chains. No human had ever been asked such a question. No human had ever been allowed to explain. Her lips trembled as she forced herself to speak. Because, my lord, I am only a servant. My pain does not matter. A hush fell across the hall, deeper than before. The words seemed to echo, bouncing against the golden walls and striking the pride of every dragon present. Some shifted uncomfortably, others glared at her with disdain, as if her very voice was an insult. But the Emperor leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing, his expression unreadable. He studied her, as though weighing her soul. Then, his voice dropped low, sharp with anger, but not aimed at her. Only a servant. His claws tightened on the throne's armrest. Do you believe your life is worth so little? The maid dared not answer. If she said yes, she would confirm what every dragon believed. If she said no, she might anger him further. Her silence filled the hall like smoke. Whispers began to rise from the dragon lords. This is madness, one hissed under his breath. He lowers himself for a human, another muttered. Weakness, growled a third. But not one of them dared to say it loud enough for the Emperor to hear. The Emperor's gaze cut across the hall, and silence returned at once. His presence was too heavy, his power too vast. No dragon was foolish enough to challenge him openly. He turned back to the maid. His voice was quieter now, but every word carried command. "Look at me." Her heart froze. No human dared meet the eyes of a dragon, much less the Emperor. To do so was to invite death. Her trembling hands clenched against her dress as she lifted her gaze slowly, terrified of what she might see. His eyes blazed like the heart of a star, piercing through her fear, through her flesh, reaching into something deeper she did not understand. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. The weight of his stare was unbearable, yet she could not look away. Her breath quickened, her chest rising and falling as though she were drowning in fire. Then the Emperor spoke, his voice softer than before, yet stronger than any command. "Do not hide again. Not from me." The hall stirred with quiet shock. His words carried meaning beyond protection. They sounded almost personal. The maid felt her knees weaken. Her mind screamed with confusion. Why would he speak this way? Why her, a worthless human maid? She wanted to bow again, to hide, but her body did not move. It was as if his command bound her in invisible chains. The Emperor leaned back against his throne, but his gaze never left her. "From this day," he said, "you will not serve in the lower halls." The words struck the dragons like a hammer. Murmurs erupted instantly, shock and anger mixing in their voices. What is he doing? A human in the upper palace? This cannot be. The maid's eyes widened. She shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. "My lord, no. I am not worthy. I cannot." "Silence," the Emperor interrupted, his tone sharp as a blade. She dropped her gaze again, her body trembling, her words dying in her throat. His golden eyes narrowed, and a faint growl rumbled deep in his chest. "You will obey." The hall fell into uneasy silence again. The dragons exchanged looks of fury, confusion, and fear. They did not understand, and they did not dare question. But inside their hearts, unrest had begun to grow. The maid stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think. Her world had turned upside down in mere moments. She had lived her life in shadows, invisible, unnoticed. Now the Emperor himself had torn her from that darkness and thrown her into the light. She did not know whether to feel saved or doomed. For in the Dragon Empire, to be seen was dangerous. To be noticed was to be drawn into battles far greater than any human could survive. And now, every dragon eye in the hall burned with hatred toward her. She felt their stares, sharp as knives, cutting into her back. She could almost hear their thoughts. Why her? Why does he protect her? What makes her special? The Emperor rose from his throne, his towering form casting a long shadow over her. His wings shifted slightly, scales glimmering in the firelight. When he spoke again, his voice rolled through the chamber like thunder, silencing every whisper, every hidden thought. "Let it be known. No hand shall touch this human again. She is under my eye." Gasps spread across the hall. Some dragons lowered their heads in forced respect, but their tails twitched with anger. Others kept their faces blank, though rage burned beneath their calm masks. The maid's chest tightened as his words sank in. She was under his eye. What did that mean? Protection, or a cage? The Emperor's eyes narrowed once more as he studied her trembling form. He said no more, but the fire in his gaze was enough to keep the hall frozen in silence. Slowly, he turned and began to leave the chamber, his steps heavy and commanding. As he passed, every dragon bowed lower, their fear stronger than their pride. But their thoughts remained sharp, like daggers in the dark. When his shadow left the hall, the air slowly loosened. The maid stood there, still shaking, unable to breathe freely. The other servants avoided looking at her. They moved quickly, silently, afraid that being near her now could bring them danger. She was no longer invisible. She had been marked. Marked by the gaze of the Dragon Emperor. And though she still did not understand why, She knew her life would never be the same. Somewhere deep inside her heart, fear and curiosity battled. What did he see in her? Why had he spoken to her at all? And most of all, what would the other dragons do to her now that she had caught his eye? The answer, she feared, would come sooner than she wished. The air in the grand hall was heavy as stone, and the silence felt sharp enough to cut. The maid remained frozen where she stood, her heart pounding in her chest, every muscle trembling under the weight of dragon eyes that hated her presence. The Emperor's command still rang in the air. No hand shall touch this human again. Those words carried power, and no dragon dared to disobey them openly. But their anger was alive, thick, and dangerous. When the Emperor left the chamber, the lords and guards bowed low until his shadow vanished from the golden doors. Only then did whispers rise like low fire, angry voices hidden beneath sharp breaths. Some dragons muttered that he had gone mad, that he was weak, that no ruler should waste even a glance on a human maid. Others stayed quiet, but their silence carried the weight of schemes forming in secret. The maid could feel all of it, though no one spoke directly to her. She lowered her head and tried to shrink, wishing she could vanish again, wishing she could return to the safety of invisibility. But invisibility was gone. She had been marked by his eye, and that mark could not be erased. The next morning the punishment came. The guards who had hurt her were brought to the center of the hall in chains, their heads bowed in shame and fury. Their scales, once proud, now looked dull beneath the weight of iron. The dragons who had once mocked and beaten humans without fear now trembled before their emperor's judgment. The maid was called again to witness. She did not wish to go, but when summoned by the emperor's word, there was no choice. She entered the chamber quietly, her hands trembling as she clutched her worn dress. The hall was full, lords seated along the sides, soldiers standing tall, servants pressed against the walls. All eyes followed her, as though she carried a curse. She kept her gaze low, feeling their hatred crawl over her skin. At the far end, the emperor sat on his throne, his expression unreadable, his eyes burning as always with fire that seemed older than the stars. When she stepped into the light, his gaze moved to her instantly, and the hall grew quiet again. She felt her breath catch, her legs heavy as stone. The emperor raised a clawed hand, and the chained guards were shoved forward. They stumbled, their tails dragging against the floor, their faces twisted with fear and anger. One of them dared to snarl under his breath, but when the emperor's golden eyes locked on him, his voice died in his throat. "You dared raise your hand against one under my rule." The emperor's voice rolled like thunder across the chamber, shaking even the walls. "You thought your cruelty would go unseen. You thought no one would care." The guards said nothing. Fear held their jaws shut. The emperor rose from his throne, his towering figure casting a shadow that reached across the floor to where the maid stood. His wings stretched slightly, the scales catching firelight like liquid gold. "You were wrong," he said. "Her bruises are your shame." The hall went silent again. The words struck not only the guilty but every dragon in the room. To hear their emperor speak such words for a human maid was like hearing the sky itself break. The guards finally spoke, their voices rough and desperate. "She is human," one cried out. "She is nothing. We did not think." His words ended in a scream as fire burst across the chains, burning his scales without touching his flesh. The magic was cruel, and the emperor's eyes burned brighter. "You did not think," he repeated coldly. "You forgot that my rule is law, and in my law, no one is nothing." Gasps filled the chamber. Dragons shifted uneasily, their claws scratching against stone floors. The lords who had once whispered against him now lowered their eyes, afraid to meet his gaze. The emperor's power filled the air like a storm about to break. He turned slightly, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Let all here see what becomes of those who abuse power over the weak." His clawed hand lifted, and in an instant, the chains around the guards glowed white-hot. Their cries echoed through the hall, raw and terrible, before silence fell again. When the light faded, the guards lay motionless, their punishment complete. The hall reeked of fear and burned metal. No dragon dared to move, No servant dared to breathe. The emperor lowered his hand slowly, his expression cold, his power terrifying. Then, to the shock of all, his gaze turned back to the maid. She lowered her head quickly, her knees trembling, afraid of what would come next. His voice softened, but it still carried through every corner of the hall. "Do you see?" She hesitated before whispering, her voice thin and afraid. "Yes, my lord." His eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment she thought she had spoken wrong. But then he turned his gaze away, as though satisfied. He returned to his throne, his towering form sinking into golden shadow, but his command still echoed through the chamber. "Let it be known. My eye sees all. No hand may strike without consequence. Let this be remembered." The lords bowed deeply, though inside their hearts boiled. The soldiers lowered their heads, though their eyes held sparks of anger. The servants trembled, some daring to glance at the maid with envy, others with hatred. She stood still, her body shaking, unsure if she should run or fall. Her heart pounded with confusion. Why was he doing this? Why did he care? She was nothing, and yet he had shattered tradition, shattered pride, and spilled dragon blood for her. When the chamber was dismissed, the maid slipped away quickly, trying to escape the weight of their stares. In the quiet of the servant halls, she pressed her back against the wall and slid to the floor, her hands covering her face. Tears burned her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Her life was no longer her own. She was caught in the emperor's gaze, and that gaze had changed everything. Somewhere deep inside, she felt the stir of something more frightening than fear itself. A question that would not leave her. Was she a burden, or was she becoming something greater? That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her bruises still aching but her mind lost in fire and shadows. She did not understand him, and she feared she never would. But she knew one thing with certainty. The emperor had chosen to protect her, and that choice would not be forgotten. Not by the dragons. Not by her. And not by the fate waiting to unfold. The days after the punishment were not quiet. The palace of dragons, usually filled with the steady rhythm of command and order, now whispered with unrest. The lords spoke in low voices behind closed doors, the soldiers carried tension in every movement, and the servants moved faster, afraid of being caught in the fire of dragon anger. The maid, who once lived unseen, now carried the weight of every eye. Wherever she went, she felt stares burning her back. Some glared with open hatred, others with disbelief, and a few with something worse, silent curiosity, like hunters studying prey. She tried to lower her head, to move quickly, to disappear into the shadows again, but invisibility was gone. She had been marked by the emperor's words, placed under his eye, and that mark followed her everywhere. Yet something else had changed. The bruises on her arms still hurt, but no dragon dared raise a hand against her again. The guards kept their distance, their tails twitching in irritation whenever she passed. The higher lords no longer ignored her, but their stares cut deeper than claws. Even the other humans avoided her now. Some looked at her with awe, as if she were touched by something beyond their reach, but most avoided her, afraid that her strange protection might bring them danger. She felt more alone than ever before. In the great hall, her duties were changed. No longer did she scrub floors or carry heavy loads. Instead, she was placed among the upper servants, those who handled smaller, safer tasks, pouring water, carrying scrolls, lighting torches in the outer chambers. It was work far lighter than what she had endured before, but to her, it felt heavier than stone. For each time she entered those halls, she felt the emperor's gaze. She never sought it, but always, she found it there, hidden behind golden fire, watching. He spoke little, yet his eyes found her often, and when they did, her heart raced until her knees weakened. She could not understand it. Why did he look at her so? What did he see in her? She was not beautiful, not powerful, not important. She was only human, one of many, and yet his eyes lingered on her as if she carried some secret she did not know herself. The dragons noticed it too. Whispers grew sharper, more dangerous. "He is distracted," one lord said in the shadows. His eye is clouded. Another growled. A human is not worth an emperor's breath. He insults us all. But none dared say these things openly, not yet. They bowed and obeyed, but in the darkness of their hearts, rebellion stirred like coals waiting for flame. The maid felt the danger but could not speak of it. She walked each day with quiet fear, knowing that hatred circled her like wolves in the night. Sometimes, she thought of begging the emperor to release her, to let her vanish back into the lower halls, to let her become unseen once more. But each time she thought of it, she remembered his voice, deep and unyielding, "Do not hide from me." Those words bound her, though she did not understand why. One evening, as the twin suns dipped low behind the palace spires, painting the sky in shades of fire, she was called to the emperor's private chamber. Her heart pounded as she walked the long path, her hands cold, her steps unsteady. Servants rarely entered there. Even dragon lords entered with caution. She reached the tall doors, guarded by 2 soldiers in golden armor. Their eyes burned with resentment as they let her pass, but they said nothing. Inside, the chamber was vast, filled with the scent of smoke and old stone. The walls were carved with images of dragons conquering stars, their wings stretched wide across the heavens. At the far end, the emperor stood near a tall window, his form outlined by fading sunlight. He did not turn as she entered. His voice carried through the chamber, calm but heavy. "You are afraid." She froze, her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she bowed her head. "Yes, my lord." His golden eyes turned to her at last, piercing, unblinking. "Do you fear me?" She hesitated, unsure of what to say. To deny would be a lie, to admit might anger him. Her lips parted softly. "I fear everything." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, to her shock, the emperor let out a low sound that almost resembled a laugh, though it held no warmth. "That is wise," he said. "Fear keeps the weak alive. But you—" He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "You are no longer weak." She shook her head quickly, her voice trembling. "I am only human. I am nothing." His gaze sharpened, and his voice dropped to a near whisper. "Nothing does not draw my eye." Her breath caught again, confusion twisting her chest. She wanted to ask what he meant, but fear sealed her lips. He studied her for a long moment, then turned away, looking once more to the fading suns. "You will stay among the upper halls," he said firmly. "No one will touch you. No one will harm you. Those who try will face the same end as the guards." His words were not a choice, they were law. She bowed her head, her voice weak. "Yes, my lord." He did not dismiss her immediately. Instead, he stood in silence, his wings folding slowly against his back. The chamber grew darker as the suns dipped lower, shadows crawling along the walls. Finally, he spoke again, softer this time. "Do not fear the eyes that watch you. Fear only the shadows that do not." She did not understand, but she nodded anyway, clutching her hands together to keep them from shaking. He turned his gaze back to her once more, and for a moment she thought she saw something within the fire of his eyes, something ancient, something heavy with sorrow. But the moment passed, and his expression hardened again. "Go," he commanded. She bowed deeply and fled the chamber, her heart pounding louder than ever. That night, she lay awake again, her mind filled with questions that had no answers. Why did he protect her? Why did he care? And most of all, what was the meaning of his strange words about shadows? In the Palace of Dragons, whispers never died, and shadows always moved. She did not know it yet, but danger was already rising. The Emperor's silent protection was a shield, but it was also a target. And though his power could command fear, it could not silence every scheme. Somewhere deep in the halls, voices spoke in secret. "She is his weakness," they whispered. "If the Emperor's eye is fixed on her, then she is where we will strike." The maid, alone in her small chamber, felt only the unease of a storm she could not yet see. And though she tried to close her eyes, sleep never came. The palace had grown restless in the days that followed. Though the emperor's command had silenced open defiance, whispers spread like smoke through every corridor. Dragons who once roared with pride now lowered their voices, speaking only in shadows. Servants walked with quicker steps, glancing over their shoulders, afraid of unseen eyes. And at the center of it all was the maid, no longer unseen, no longer safe. She worked quietly, pouring wine, carrying scrolls, lighting lamps, but wherever she went, the air grew tense. Some dragons scowled openly, their claws tapping against stone as if reminding her she did not belong. Others watched in silence, studying her as though she were a riddle they could not solve. She felt the weight of every stare, and yet she carried on, her heart trembling, her thoughts clouded. The emperor had promised protection, but protection was not peace. She lived each day knowing she was hated, knowing she was feared, knowing she had become something she never wished to be, noticed. One night, long after the palace had grown quiet and the twin moons rose high above the spires, she was summoned again. The guards who came for her spoke little, their eyes sharp with resentment, but they obeyed the order, leading her through endless corridors until they reached the emperor's private hall. The tall doors opened, and inside, the chamber glowed with the soft light of fire torches. The emperor sat alone near a great stone table carved with maps of stars and planets, his eyes fixed on something far beyond her understanding. When she entered, he did not speak at once. He let the silence hang heavy, the crackle of fire filling the air. She lowered her head and waited, her hands folded tightly, her body tense. At last, his deep voice broke the silence. "You remind me of someone." She dared to look up slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes. The emperor's gaze was distant, as if seeing not her, but a memory. His voice carried a strange weight, heavy with something she had never heard from him before. Not anger, not command, but loss. Long ago, when the empire was still young, dragons warred with humans across the stars. We saw them as weak, as nothing but prey. Yet there was one who defied that belief. His claws brushed the stone table, tracing lines across the star map. A human warrior. He was fierce, brave, and unbroken even in the face of death. He fought not with strength, but with something greater. His spirit could not be crushed. The maid listened in silence, her heart racing. She had never heard a dragon speak of humans with anything but contempt. Yet here was the emperor, his voice softening as he spoke of one with respect. "He saved my life," the emperor continued, his eyes narrowing at the memory. "When my enemies turned against me, when even dragons sought my blood, it was this human who stood in the fire beside me. He bore wounds that no creature should survive, and yet he did not fall. His will shamed even dragons." His voice grew quieter. But in the end, death claimed him. No blade, no flame could break him, but time took what battle could not. The maid felt a tightness in her chest, as if the emperor's words pressed against her heart. She had never imagined the mighty ruler of dragons carrying such a memory, such a scar. She dared to whisper, her voice trembling. "And I remind you of him." The emperor's eyes turned to her at last, sharp and burning. "Yes," he said simply. "When I saw your bruises, when I saw the way you endured without a sound, I saw the same spirit. Weak in body, perhaps, but unbroken." His gaze did not waver, and she felt as though his fire burned through every wall she had built around her heart. "That is why I will not allow you to be crushed. I will not watch it happen again." Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to speak, to deny, to tell him he was wrong. She was no warrior, no savior, no one. She was just a servant, fragile and afraid. But his gaze silenced her, his words pressing into her soul like fire carved into stone. The emperor turned away, his wings shifting slightly as he looked once more to the star maps. "The lords do not understand," he said. "They see weakness where I see strength. They call me foolish, though they dare not say it aloud. But their silence is not loyalty. It is the silence before rebellion." His claws scraped against the stone. "And when that rebellion rises, it will strike not at me, but at you." Her heart froze. Fear surged through her veins. She had felt the hatred, the glares, the whispers, but to hear it from his mouth was different. It was no longer suspicion. It was truth. Why keep me then? She whispered, her voice breaking. If I bring danger, if I bring rebellion, why not let me vanish? Why not let me return to the shadows? His eyes snapped back to her, fire blazing, his voice sharp. Because I will not allow them to decide who lives and who dies. I am emperor. My will is law, not theirs. And I have chosen. She lowered her head again, her chest heavy with confusion. Chosen. The word echoed in her mind, twisting her thoughts into knots. She had been chosen, not for her worth, but for what she reminded him of. A memory, a ghost, a scar of the past. She did not know whether to feel honored or cursed. The chamber fell silent again, broken only by the crackle of torches. The Emperor's eyes softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. Do not mistake my protection for kindness. You live because you are under my eye. If you falter, if you break, then I was wrong. And I am never wrong. His words struck deep, heavy with warning. She bowed low, whispering, I will not falter, my lord. Though in her heart, doubt twisted like a knife. She was no warrior. She was no unbroken spirit. She was only human. Could she carry the weight of his choice? The Emperor turned back to his maps, dismissing her with a single word. Go. She left the chamber quickly, her steps unsteady, her heart a storm. The night air outside was cold, but inside her chest burned with fire. She thought of the human warrior the Emperor had spoken of, a man who fought beside dragons, who died unbroken. She could not imagine being like him, yet the Emperor saw him in her. Why? The question haunted her as she returned to her small chamber. She lay awake beneath the twin moons, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a storm of fear and confusion. The Emperor's past had changed her future. His memory had bound her fate. And though she did not know what path lay ahead, she knew this, she could no longer hide. She had been chosen, and that choice would echo far beyond her will. Somewhere in the shadows of the palace, dragons whispered again, their voices sharp with poison. He sees a ghost in her, one hissed. Then let that ghost be his downfall. The palace of dragons grew darker with each passing day, though the sun still rose and fell over the spires of gold. Whispers grew sharper, carried not only in the servant halls but among the dragon lords themselves. The Emperor had declared the human Maid under his eye, and that command none could break openly. Yet in silence rebellion brewed. The lords bowed when he walked, their voices obedient, but in their private chambers their claws scratched the stone as they spoke of insult and weakness. He forgets what we are, one growled. He lowers us before a human. Another hissed, if his eye is blind, then we will open it with blood. In the shadows their plans began to form, not to strike the Emperor directly, for his power was too great, but to strike at what he now protected. The Maid lived her days in uneasy silence, never free of the eyes that followed her. The Emperor's protection was like a shield of fire, yet shields draw arrows, and she could feel them aiming already. The other humans avoided her now, too afraid to speak, and the dragon's stares grew sharper each time she entered a room. She clung to her duties, pouring wine, carrying scrolls, lighting lamps, her head always low, but she could not hide the truth. She was a marked piece on a board of war. At night she lay awake, hearing faint echoes of claws against stone, voices slipping through the walls, whispers she could not understand but knew were about her. She tried to tell herself it was fear twisting her mind, but in her heart she knew danger was real. One evening as she moved through the servant halls carrying a tray of fresh torches, she felt it again, the shadow. Footsteps behind her, too soft for dragon claws, too heavy for a servant. She did not turn. She walked faster, her hands trembling, the fire of the torches flickering with her shaking breath. The footsteps followed. She rounded a corner, heart pounding, and nearly stumbled into another servant. Relief struck her for a moment, but when she looked closer, the man's eyes darted away too quickly. He whispered something under his breath before vanishing down another corridor. She stood frozen, unsure if it was chance or warning. The fear followed her back to her small chamber, and that night she barred the door with what little strength she had. But even behind closed doors she felt watched, as if unseen eyes stared through the walls. The next day her duties changed again. A dragon steward told her to carry a scroll to the council chamber, a place she had never entered before. She obeyed without question, her steps heavy as she carried the sealed parchment. The hall was vast, filled with carved pillars and burning braziers, the air thick with the scent of smoke. The dragon lords were gathered already, their eyes sharp and voices low, but when she entered, silence fell. Their stares pierced her skin, and she felt smaller than ever. She placed the scroll on the table as commanded and turned to leave, but one voice stopped her. Human. She froze. Slowly she turned, her head bowed. A dragon lord leaned forward, his eyes like cold steel. Do you believe you deserve his protection? Her mouth went dry. She wanted to answer nothing, to vanish, but his voice carried command. Speak. Her lips trembled as she whispered, I do not deserve anything, my lord. I only serve. Laughter rumbled low across the chamber, not kind but sharp. Another lord hissed, and yet you stand above your place. You walk where no human should walk. You eat while others starve. You are shielded while others suffer. Tell me, why you? She lowered her gaze further, whispering again, I do not know. Silence stretched before one of them spoke, his voice dripping with venom. Then know this. His eye may be upon you, but many eyes are not. Shadows reach where fire cannot. She felt her knees weaken at the threat, but before she could respond, the chamber doors opened, and the emperor entered. Instantly the lords bowed low, their words silenced, their stares hidden. The maid slipped out quickly, her heart racing, knowing too well what they had meant. That night the emperor summoned her again. His gaze was sharp, his voice low. You are troubled. She lowered her head, whispering, I feel eyes in the shadows, my lord. I hear whispers. He studied her in silence for a long moment before nodding slowly. You are not wrong. They plot, but not yet. Fear them, but do not bend to them. His words gave little comfort, yet they confirmed her dread. She was not imagining it. The threat was real. Days passed, and the danger grew closer. Servants avoided her more than ever, some even refusing to walk near her. She noticed shadows moving where none should be, heard whispers stop when she entered rooms, felt the sting of unseen glares. And always, she felt the emperor's gaze from afar, watching silently. He spoke little in public, but she caught his eyes often, as though he was waiting, measuring, preparing. The palace was no longer just stone and fire. It was a cage of secrets, a battlefield waiting to ignite. One night she woke suddenly in her chamber to the sound of scratching against her door. She held her breath, staring at the wood, the faint glow of moonlight seeping through the cracks. The scratching stopped, replaced by silence, then footsteps fading down the hall. She did not sleep again. She knew it was only the beginning. Somewhere in the palace, hidden behind walls of gold and fire, dragons whispered of rebellion, of weakness, of striking where the emperor could not always see. And in those whispers her name lived like a curse. She was the hidden threat, the seed of their anger, the spark they would try to use to burn the throne. And though she wished to be unseen, though she prayed to be nothing, she could not change what she had become. She was the human under the emperor's eye. And in that eye, she was both shielded and hunted. The palace was quiet, but the silence was not peace, it was the silence before a storm. The maid felt it in her bones. Every step she took in the endless halls carried weight, every glance she caught from the dragon lords burned with hidden fire. Even the servants who once whispered kindly to her now kept their distance, their eyes darting away, as if to say, do not speak to me, do not bring danger to my door. She was alone though she walked in crowded halls. She carried trays of food and pitchers of wine. But every hand that brushed hers pulled away too quickly, as if touching her would mark them for death. She told herself to endure, she told herself to bow her head and wait for the storm to pass, but storms did not pass in dragon courts. They grew and grew until they burned everything in their path. One evening she was summoned again, but not to the emperor this time. A servant whose face she knew but whose voice shook told her quietly that she was needed in the lower halls. The words were plain, but his eyes betrayed fear. She followed anyway, her heart heavy with dread. The lower halls were cold and narrow, carved deep into the stone where firelight struggled to reach. When she arrived, she found not the emperor, but a group of dragons waiting, their eyes sharp, their wings folded tight like blades. They did not roar, they did not raise claws, instead they stared in silence, until one of them spoke. His voice was like steel scraping stone. "The emperor is blind," he said. "He sees in you something that does not exist. He forgets what we are, he forgets who rules this world." She lowered her head, whispering softly, "I am nothing, my lord, I do not seek this." But her words did not move them. Another dragon hissed, "You are everything that divides us, you are the seed of weakness in his heart." Their eyes glowed in the dim light, and she knew this was not a warning, it was an accusation. She wanted to run, but her legs would not move. She wanted to speak, but her voice was gone. They circled her slowly, not touching, not striking, but each word they spoke was like a blade. "He chooses you over us, he insults us with your breath in his halls, he sees a ghost in your bruises, but we see only poison." Finally one stepped closer, lowering his head so his firelit eyes met hers. "Betray him and live, refuse and die." Her chest froze. Betrayal, the word struck her like thunder. She shook her head, whispering quickly, "I cannot, he saved me, he shields me." But the dragon only bared his teeth. "He shields you now, but his fire cannot guard every shadow. We are many, he is one. When the moment comes, open the way for us, look to us, not him, and your life will be spared." She fell to her knees, trembling, tears burning her eyes. "Please, I am only a maid, I have no power." But they laughed low and cruel. "That is your power. No one looks at a servant, no one questions where she walks. The shadows will follow you, the key will be in your hand. When the hour comes, choose wisely, human, for one choice gives life, the other gives death." With that they turned and left, leaving her shaking in the cold hall, her mind a storm. She stumbled back to her chamber, clutching her chest, as if her heart would break. She wanted to run to the emperor to tell him everything, but fear chained her voice. What if he did not believe her? What if he saw her as weak? What if her words were taken as betrayal itself? For the first time she did not know where safety lay. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words repeating in her mind, "Betray him, and live, refuse and die." Days passed, and the tension only grew. The dragon lords spoke sweetly in the council, but their eyes burned with secret fire. The servants moved like ghosts, silent, avoiding her, and she felt every moment that the walls were closing in. She could not tell who was enemy and who was ally. She could not even trust herself, for her thoughts twisted between fear of death and fear of betraying the one who had shown her mercy. One night she found a folded scrap of parchment beneath her door. No servant dared write to her, yet the words were clear: "When the moon is dark, open the eastern gate, and you will live. If you do not, you will die with him." Her hands shook as she read it again and again. The eastern gate, she had passed it many times carrying supplies. She knew it was guarded, but she also knew the path servants used to slip through unnoticed. The dragons had chosen her as the knife, not the sword. Her betrayal would open the way, her silence would seal her death. She pressed the note to her chest, tears falling. She wanted to burn it, she wanted to forget it, but she could not, for the truth was simple: whether she acted or not, blood would fall. When the moon was dark, the emperor noticed her silence. He called her to him and studied her with eyes that saw too much. "Something weighs on you," he said softly but firmly. She bowed low, whispering, "Only fear, my lord." The lords look at me with fire in their eyes. He frowned, his voice low. "They are restless, their pride bleeds, their claws itch to strike, but they dare not while I stand." His gaze sharpened. "You must not falter, do you understand?" She nodded quickly, forcing her voice to hold steady. "I will not falter, my lord." Yet in her chest the note burned like fire. The night of the dark moon came quickly. The sky above the spires swallowed its light, and shadows stretched long across the palace halls. The maid walked slowly, her heart a storm. The eastern gate waited. The parchment's command echoed in her head. Every step closer felt like walking toward her own grave. She saw the guards at their posts, their wings folded, their eyes sharp but tired. She saw the narrow servant passage leading to the gate's inner lock, a path no dragon ever noticed. Her hands trembled. She could slip through, she could open it and live, but in doing so she would betray the emperor, the one who had spared her, the one who had shielded her. She stood in the shadows, shaking as the night deepened. The choice pressed against her chest until she could hardly breathe. Betrayal or loyalty, life or death. The moment had come, and she knew whatever choice she made would change the fate of the empire forever. The night of the dark moon hung heavy over the dragon palace, the sky above was empty of light, and even the fires in the great hall seemed dimmer, as though shadows swallowed their glow. The maid stood hidden in the narrow servant passage, her back pressed against the cold stone, her hands trembling, the note burned in her pocket, its words echoing in her skull. Open the eastern gate, and you will live, do nothing, and you will die with him. She could hear the distant wings of the guards outside, the scrape of claws against the stone, the crackle of fire torches. The path was open before her, she had only to walk forward, slip through the hidden gap, and undo the lock. She could imagine it, the creak of the iron gate, the silent rush of figures through the dark, the rebellion flooding inside. She could live, if she chose to live, but at what cost? She thought of the Emperor, his eyes like fire yet filled with something she had never seen in dragons before, a strange patience, a strange care. She thought of the day he had seen her bruises when no one else had cared, when all had looked away, he had not, and that memory clung to her heart even now. But she also thought of the dragons who had cornered her in the lower halls, their voices sharp, their threats cold. Betray him, and live, they had said, refuse and die. Her legs shook beneath her. She wanted to run, but there was no place to run to. She wanted to scream, but silence chained her voice. Her heart beat like a drum, louder and louder, until she thought the guards must hear it. The sky was darker than ever, and she knew the moment was now. The rebellion waited somewhere beyond the gate. The Emperor stood somewhere unaware within the palace. The fate of both lay in her trembling hands. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, I am only a maid, I am nothing. But then she heard her own voice echo in her mind, and it struck her like lightning. Perhaps it was because she was nothing that she could change everything. She stepped forward slowly, her breath shallow, each step echoing like thunder in her head. She reached the small iron latch hidden behind the wall, the path to the gate lock. Her fingers brushed it, and in that moment, 1,000 images flashed before her. She saw the Emperor, falling flames devouring the halls, humans dragged in chains, dragons tearing each other apart. She saw the faces of the servants she had once spoken to, their fear, their silence. She saw her own reflection, hollow and broken, alive, but guilty. Her hand froze, her chest burned with fire, and she pulled back, shaking her head. No, she whispered, no, louder now. No, I will not betray him. The words left her lips, and felt like fire turned to steel. Her decision was made. She turned away from the gate, and ran back through the passage, her breath ragged, her feet pounding against the stone. She would face death, if it came, but it would be with loyalty, not betrayal. Yet, as she reached the hall, a shadow stepped out, blocking her path, a dragon lord, his eyes gleaming with rage. He had been waiting, his voice a hiss. You were to open it, human. She stumbled back, shaking. I will not. His snarl echoed off the stone. Then you choose death. He raised his claw ready to strike, but before it fell, a blaze of fire tore through the hall. The Emperor himself stood behind him, wings unfurled, eyes burning with fury. The traitor dragon turned in shock, but had no time to speak. The Emperor's fire consumed him in a roar, leaving nothing but ash. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. The Emperor's gaze turned to the maid. She fell to her knees, shaking, her voice broken. My lord, they told me to open the gate, they gave me the note, they said betray you or die. I did not, I could not. Tears fell hot on the stone, his eyes softened though fire still blazed behind them. He stepped closer, his voice deep, but quiet. I knew the storm was near, I feared they would use you as the knife, but you chose with courage. You are no longer only a maid, you are my proof that loyalty can live even in weakness. He raised his gaze, and fire poured from his wings, shaking the very halls. Hear me, all who plot in shadows. His voice roared across the palace. Your betrayal ends tonight. Your claws will not tear this throne, your fire will not burn this empire. Dragons rushed into the halls, guards, servants, lords, but all froze at the sight. The ash, the Emperor standing over the maid, his fire like the rising sun. The rebellion that had whispered in the shadows found itself silenced. The lords who had plotted trembled, for if he could destroy one of their own in a breath, what hope had they? She raised her head slowly, her fear still heavy, but in her heart a strange light grew, for she had chosen, she had defied death, not with strength, but with loyalty, and the Emperor had seen it. The night of the dark moon ended not with betrayal, but with fire that burned the rebellion to ash. In the days that followed, the palace grew quiet again, but it was not the silence of storm, it was the silence after thunder, when the sky clears. Though scars remain, the lords bowed lower than ever, their whispers silenced, their eyes filled with fear, yet hidden beneath it was something else, a bitter respect. The humans looked at her differently, no longer only a servant. They saw the one who had stood in the storm, and had not broken. Though she never sought their eyes, never sought their words, she returned to her duties, pouring wine, carrying scrolls, lighting lamps, but she carried herself with a weight that had not been there before, for she knew what she had faced and what she had chosen, and she knew the Emperor knew too. Sometimes she caught his gaze across the hall, not the burning fury of a ruler, but the steady fire of one who remembers. In her bruises, he had once seen weakness, but now he saw choice, and in that choice, everything had changed. The empire still stood, the throne still burned, and she, though still a maid, had become part of its story forever.